You mentioned earlier that, you're you're marginalizing yourself because you're an American writer who writes about the South, and you're also a short story writer. And then you bring
now I'm a Canadian.
Yeah, now you're a Canadian short story. Well, Canadian short story writers have it, a bit of prestige because of
They do.
Alice Munro
and Mavis Gallant.
Yeah.
Do you know her?
I actually don't read her work.
Please read Mavis Gallant. Go on your way out, check her out. I'm serious. She is one of the most overlooked, most wonderful writers Canada has ever produced. So.
Yeah, I actually did read about somebody who is a big fan of her, who was shocked that she wasn't more famous.
Yeah.
But why short stories? Why not a giant sprawl? Why not an enormous 400-word novel?
I know.
In 4 parts.
I know. I don't know. I thought Wedding Song for Poorer People, the one about the theater company, was going to be a novel. I really did, and I thought, okay, now this is it. I'm gonna be a grown-up. I'm gonna write a real novel, and it wasn't. It just wasn't. Its own parameters said, no, I'm done. I'm this long. This is my scope. And then I was actually talking at that same residency in Virginia with a Russian literary critic who was talking about her sense of the difference between a novel and a novella is that a novella was more about psychological states, and the novel was more plot-driven. His story was dictating.
Stuff happens.
Yeah. Now, we can all think of novels that are about psychological states and, novellas that are more plot-driven, but there was something about that it was closer to the short story in feeling tone, I think, than the novel.
I guess it's because with a short story, because you're limited to, or novella, you're limited to a certain number of words, so the big changes have to be kind of internal and psychological, whereas if it's a novel, people have to age and they have to go through traumas and things like that, or change locations.
Well, and the amazing thing about a short story is then how do you deal with all of that context and world and politics and how do you make it known through this very, very tight form? Yi Yun Lee talks about that. She's a wonderful Chinese-American short story writer and novelist who lives in California. But some of her short stories are some of the best in the language, and she's writing in her second language. And she's in her 30s. And she's already mastered the short story form in English. Where do you go after that? The novel, I guess.
Probably.
So who knows, Right, series, there we go.
And what do you think about writing for, the way that the book market is supposedly shrinking? I still see enormous books being published, but supposedly nobody reads anymore, or adults don't read anymore. How do you ever write these books planning to make a best-selling 50 Shades of Grey type novel?
That's what I'm doing. You guess. And we're announcing it here, right? No. But don't hold your breath.
But do you does that this will sell, or this will hit that
No, you know
market?
what?
Does that ever
that would
enter your
just
mind?
drain every bit of joy out of the process. I'm sometimes envious of people who are successful and sell a lot, and but again, it's this colony in Virginia. We would all eat breakfast together, and sometimes lunch, and then dinner together. And I'd hear the other writers talking about their advances and their contracts, their 3-book contracts.
Oh, for series? Wow! Really?
Not even a series. They didn't necessarily have to be related to each other. I mean, can you imagine being paid for something that you haven't written?
Oh, really? Not even written? Okay.
I'd give up and go home. But a little part of me was going, I wish I had that, or somebody's getting their novel made into a movie, and they're getting a big check, but then I realized that they're under this enormous pressure to make it like the last one, or make it like the
thing that sold
the thing that we think that the market wants, or something like that. And I realized at that moment that I was completely free because no one was waiting for this. Literally. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have an editor. I didn't have my last publisher, University of Georgia Press, made it very clear that they would read something else, but they probably weren't interested in another collection of short fiction. And I was free.
And yet it seems like short fiction should be should be the form that a lot of people will be interested in now, because people are reading books on phones, they're reading on tablets. It's not conducive to, massive Victorian-style novels. So it's, do you feel that ever short stories are, especially after Alice Munro, going to make a bit of a comeback?
We thought. That was 2013. I think the window is closed. I was at a book festival in Virginia. Again, Virginia. Boy, Virginia's coming up a lot tonight. In 2013, when the paperback of my first book came out, and I was on a panel on the short story, and people love to read short stories. We write them, and yet it's not. There's something. It's a smaller audience. It always has been, and I think it always will be. Part of what's working against us is the demise of the magazines that used to publish them.
I see.
I mean, there were probably 10 or 12 different top-notch magazines, weeklies or monthlies, that always had short stories. They were news magazines maybe, or, the women's magazines, Mademoiselle, Harper's, Ladies' Home Journal. You'd think Ladies' Home Journal. They were publishing some really great fiction. And for a while there was some thought. There were two Canadian companies that wanted to get together and sell electronic short stories, single copies for the phone and things like that.
Right.
But it didn't fly.
Well, that's interesting because it took off in Japan.